Donald Trump has tried everything he possibly can to distract the media from his Jeffrey Epstein scandal, and he's just failed. He's tried attacking Obama, tried running away, tried banning reporters from his press pool, but he just can't shift their focus. Until today, when the media picked up a new story, reigniting a scandal from a month ago, but it's not a good distraction for Donald Trump because it is completely humiliating his administration and actually ties back in to Epstein. We are going to get into it all and how these leaked texts are affecting Trump. But before we do, if I could quickly ask you to leave a like on this video, and if you haven't already and you enjoy our channel, to hit that subscribe button because it goes a long way in supporting our work. Now, before we can get into these text messages and the scandal that has been reignited by them, I want to start with where Donald Trump has most of his panic right now. That is his Jeffrey Epstein scandal and his administration that's in shambles.
Donald Trump entering the week in a position he doesn't typically find himself in, with some of his most loyal backers low mo, as in low momentum, on spinning a bogus narrative about the Jeffrey Epstein investigation. Brand new reporting in the Washington Post reveals that Team Trump was caught flat-footed by the reaction to the DOJ memo that attempted to pour cold water on the existence of bombshell revelations in the government's possession. Claims spread most convincingly and prolifically by the officials who now populate the highest levels of Trump's own administration. From that new reporting, quote, Donald Trump is increasingly frustrated with his administration's handling of the furor around the Jeffrey Epstein files, concerned that the saga's unabated domination of the news is overshadowing his agenda. That is according to two people familiar with his thinking. One person tells the Washington Post this, quote, this is a pretty substantial distraction. While many are trying to keep the unity, in many ways, the DOJ and the FBI are breaking at the seams. Many are wondering how sustainable this is going to be for all the parties involved, be it the FBI director or the attorney general. Well, perhaps the FBI director or the attorney general should have dialed back the promises they were making on television about the existence of lists and other evidence, given that they were appointed by a president who has made no secret about his belief that the main function of the FBI director and attorney general is now to protect him. We have shown you many of the clips of Dan Bongino and Kash Patel pushing, clamoring, screaming about the release of the Epstein files. Remember, it is Kash Patel who lashed out at House Republicans back in 2023 by saying this, quote, put on your big boy pants and let us know who the pedophiles are, end quote.
All hell is breaking loose in this administration, but I think it's also particularly important to point out the leaks that have come from Donald Trump's top officials. We're talking about that meeting in May when Pam Bondi told Donald Trump in the presence of Kash Patel and other high-ranking officials that his name did in fact come up in the Epstein files, which just goes to show us that people in that meeting and people around Donald Trump are leaking this information to try to fit their agenda. But it's not the only leak we see, as text messages recently came out surrounding one of Donald Trump's scandals from earlier this month. One that I guess he didn't want us to talk about then. Maybe he does now, but I don't think so, even though he said this just a few weeks ago.
Are you still talking about Jeffrey Epstein? This guy's been talked about for years. You're asking, we have Texas, we have this, we have all of the things. And are people still talking about this guy, this creep? That is unbelievable. Do you want to waste the time, and do you feel like answering?
I don't mind answering.
I mean, I can't believe you're asking a question on Epstein at a time like this where we're having some of the greatest success and also tragedy with what happened in Texas. It just seems...
When the lack of preparedness in a MAGA town and Donald Trump's failed FEMA response was the story of the week at the beginning of this month, that's what he wanted us to focus on. Not because he actually cared about the victims. If he did, he would have gotten FEMA in check, but he wanted to distract from Epstein. Well, I don't know if he's necessarily getting this wish because we're continuing to discuss Epstein, but Texas has reemerged into the spotlight because of some leaked texts that humiliate Donald Trump and show what a failure he is. Kristi Noem derided as Homeland Barbie by Texas officials after deadly flood. Newly released texts show that the city manager mocked the Homeland Security chief. Department of Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem's carefully crafted image as a tough woman has taken a hit. In the aftermath of a deadly flooding in Texas over the July 4th holiday that claimed 137 lives, Noem faced criticism from Ken Pagurek, head of the Federal Emergency Management Agency's Urban Search and Rescue Division, who quit in protest over a 72-hour delay responding to the crisis that he blamed on her budget-slashing restructuring. It appears Texas officials responding to the disaster on the ground were no fans of the Homeland Security Secretary either, according to text messages obtained by local news station KSAT. As rescuers pulled bodies from the Guadalupe River, Noem toured the area and held a press conference on July 5th. After the media event, a local government staffer texted the city manager, Dalton Rice, who appeared standing behind Noem on television, to say, "Just saw you met Homeland Barbie. How is she?" According to KSAT, Rice responded via text, "Ah ha ha ha, basically Homeland Barbie." The Daily Beast first gave the 53-year-old the moniker of Ice Barbie for her love of dolling up and inviting the press to photograph her cosplaying an Immigrations and Customs Enforcement agent or standing in front of detained migrants behind bars, among other bizarre publicity stunts. The former South Dakota governor has faced withering criticism for her response to the Texas floods. Under Noem's tenure, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, which is part of the DHS, fired hundreds of contractors at call centers in the lead up to the disaster. A report from the New York Times then found that FEMA failed to answer nearly two-thirds of distress calls from victims. What's more, a new rule requiring all grants and contracts over $100,000 to be signed by the secretary delayed the deployment of search rescue crews by 72 hours. Kristi Noem mocked by Texas officials in their text messages to no one's surprise. And Midas Touch recently put out a tweet in which they said that Donald Trump sent his deputy attorney general to see Ghislaine Maxwell faster than he sent FEMA to Texas. That was Donald Trump's focus, is himself, always. It's not Texas. He didn't want us to shift our focus in the story of the week from Epstein to Texas because he was worried about the victims and he thought that that would help them. It's because he wants us distracted from his failures, which has obviously not happened. This administration is an embarrassment and they are completely incompetent. The way they've handled this Epstein catastrophe goes to show just that. This is a mismanaged cover-up. It's a failure of a cover-up. Not that I'm cheering for a successful one, but it just shows what idiots they are. And I think it's fine for us to speak in that plain language because that's how they view their supporters as well. And it's time for people to wake up to that. And it's only going to happen if we make the case, which is exactly what one Texas Democrat and Representative James Tallarico, a state representative, did on Joe Rogan's podcast. It went incredibly viral. If you haven't seen it, he gave a great interview that I want to check out with Nicole Wallace, in which he detailed how Democrats, especially those in Texas, need to be combating this administration and the GOP.
What are your values and what is your vision? What are you communicating on these shows?
Well, you mentioned in your intro about my faith. It's the foundation of everything I do. My granddad was a Baptist preacher in South Texas. And I remember when I was real little, he told me that our religion, Christianity, is a simple religion, not an easy religion, but a simple religion, because Jesus gave us two commandments, love God and love neighbor. And so that's what I do at the state capitol. I lower people's prescription drug costs. I expand access to child care. I reform our justice system. I try to fund our neighborhood schools. That's my way of trying to love my neighbor through public policy. It's also what I did as a public school teacher. And so that love for other people, including people who are different from me, people who may not agree with me, I think that's what's missing in our civic discourse these days. It feels like there's a real lack of love in our national conversation. And I think people are hungry for that. We've had 10 years of politics as blood sport. Politics as professional wrestling. I think people are ready for something different, earnestness and sincerity and love. And I do think those things are going to make a comeback in 2026.
Are you at all worried that Kamala Harris's campaign about joy was rejected and a message of love could be rejected as well?
I mean, I think that was one of the most successful parts of that campaign, was that joy. So, you know, when you lose an election by a point and a half, it's important not to underlearn lessons or overlearn lessons. And there were some wonderful parts about that campaign. And I think the joyfulness was one of the best parts. And I think we need to double down on that going forward. But, you know, one thing I think we could have done a better job of is putting the vice president in positions where she could talk directly to folks who don't always hear from a Democrat. And Joe Rogan's show is a place where you can do that. It's a little scary because, you know, I wasn't given a list of topics or questions. I was going in kind of blind. It was a 2.5-hour interview with a host who is not necessarily considered a Democrat or a progressive. But I think we hit it off, and I think we really connected on some key issues.
I mean, you're making a point about connection, and I wonder how much you think that the Democrats need to connect, or if it's that the Democrats need to moderate. What is your diagnosis of why the Democrats? I'm shocked by this as a former Republican who's voted for Democrats without thinking twice in the last 3 presidential elections. The Democrats are at their lowest approval rating in decades. I think 63% of Americans disapprove of the Democratic Party. Is your diagnosis that it's around substance, or is your diagnosis that it's around a lack of connection, or a combination of the two?
Well, and I would say that there are probably a lot of self-identified Democrats who also disapprove of the current state of the Democratic Party. And there are a lot of folks in red states like Texas who, frankly, are dissatisfied with the way the National Democratic Party fails to compete in red and in even purple parts of the country. We can't be a party that's isolated to the coasts or the big cities. We've got to be a party that competes everywhere and competes for every single vote. You know, I flipped a Trump district when I first got elected in 2018. I was running in a district that hadn't voted for a Democrat since before I was in kindergarten.
We need more Democrats exactly like James Tellerico. We need more Democrats willing to go anywhere and really talk to anyone. Bring our message wherever we possibly can. Now is a time to change minds, especially around Donald Trump's Jeffrey Epstein scandal. Make this the issue that it is, one about class. That is how we should frame this, that the rich, wealthy, well-off, and well-connected will always be protected, especially when there is a billionaire with the interest of other billionaires and the interest of making sure no one sees those photos that Jeffrey Epstein has of him, those documents alleging and claiming and showing his abuse, yet that those never come out. Let's make that the issue. We're certainly going to on this show, and if you want to support that, as always, you can hit that subscribe button, leave a like on this video, and if you stuck around to the end, drop a blue heart in the comments. And until next time, I'll see you soon.